everyone. Welcome to the Spirit of Cecilia. It has been about 3 months since I've talked to everybody, and I just thought after a summer of, intensity, lockdowns, protests, looting, injustices, the tearing down of statues, all of these things going on simultaneously. After a summer like this, I'm back now. The new school year starts this week. Pre-opening was this last week. Classes actually start this Wednesday. Just thought it was time to do a podcast and thought it would be best to do a kind of reminder about where things are. And I will freely admit, after the events of this summer, I've probably gone from conservative to reactionary. I've never felt so reactionary in my life about things and defending first principles and trying to think, what would this mean in terms of what a Russell Kirk would think, or a Robert Nisbet, or an Albert J. Nock. And we do have people. I think about people like Alex Salter doing amazing work, or Lauren Hall, or Patrick Deneen, Tom Woods. So many people doing excellent work and carrying the torch all summer despite all the chaos going on. And in a sense, I feel guilty that I haven't said anything for 3 months, and I thought it was time to get back into this. So some of you may know I'm actually on sabbatical this year, and I'm hoping to do regular updates here for Spirit of Cecilia for the 300 plus of you who have subscribed. Thank you very much, by the way. That's incredibly flattering. I know that you're mostly here for the history, and so you probably really don't want just Brad's political, cultural views, but at least I'm going to give you that some of the time. I wanted to talk just briefly today as a reminder about why conservatism is more important now in late August of 2020 than it even was 5 or 6 months ago. Conservatism has not become obsolete. It's become more important than ever. And I think it's only when we start judging things by conservative norms and recognizing that conservatism is a way of thinking, a manner of life that goes well beyond just the immediate moment, that we recognize we can really only judge the immediate moment by understanding what the core principles are. The core principles of what it means to be human, that is, to have dignity, to be unique, as John Paul II said, to be an unrepeatable center of dignity and freedom. That is what each and every human person is. A reminder that politics does not solve everything, nor can it, nor should it, nor will it, and therefore we need to be very, very skeptical of political solutions. You and I can change things. We can change things in our attitude. We can change things in our neighborhood. We can change things in our schools. We can change things in those around us. But we're not going to change the world. Not likely, most of us. Most of us are going to do the long, hard work of doing the right thing, trying to do the right thing, despite our failures and our flaws, doing the right thing at every moment. That's a hard thing to do, of course. Every moment is a moral decision. Every moment determines whether we move towards justice or injustice. Every moment determines whether we move towards prudence or imprudence, whether we move towards temperance or intemperance, fortitude or lack of fortitude, towards faith, hope, and love, or towards their opposites. Do we pursue the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? That's really important. And we know we can do that at an individual level. We can't do that at a societal level. But in the individual level, we do one thing and it ricochets and it resonates, and it may change the attitude of someone right now, or it may change the attitude of someone 20 years from now because of a word that we speak today, right? We are never guaranteed the victory of the war, but we do know that God calls us to these battles. He calls us to come and to fight and to do our best. He doesn't guarantee us victory ever. He merely says, do the right thing. The rest is in His hands. But doing the right thing by His grace is in our hands. And that, I think, is a timeless truth that we need to remember over and over again. That's something that never goes out of style. So what I wanted to do today, and I'd like to talk more about those ideas, but we'll come back to those in future podcasts. What I'd like to do today is talk briefly about a chapter that one of my favorite sociologists and historian of ideas, Robert Nisbet, talked about in his excellent book, Tradition and Revolt. In this book, which he subtitles Historical and Sociological Essays, he gives us a wide gamut of what conservatism is. Mostly the conservatism of the 1950s and 60s, but as we'll see here, these are timeless truths. And I want to talk about a chapter that Nisbet writes within this book called Conservatism and Sociology. And I think that may sound odd at first to many of us, because someone of my age, I was born in late 1967, someone of my age, we tend to think of sociology as the most radical of all the social sciences. Nothing even came close to the radicalism of sociology in my life. It was the sociologists who were always trying to tinker and mess with the human condition, at least as I knew them. Now, there are exceptions, of course. My great colleague Pete Plum is one of the ultimate exceptions to this, and I'm sure there are others as well. But sociology, at least as a study, became this kind of thing that men like C.S. Lewis just mocked to no end. That hideous strength is one of the greatest critiques of sociology I've ever read. But then we have people like Robert Nisbet, who was a serious sociologist and a serious conservative, who recognized that sociology, when properly understood, was nothing more and nothing less, it's a beautiful thing, the study of social groups. That is, how do you and I interact with our families, with our friends, with our communities, with our schools, with our businesses. This is what we do in our neighborhood associations and our churches. How do we come together as social beings? And so in this chapter, Robert Nisbet gives us 11, and I'm going to repeat them all. He gives us 11 ideas or ways of thinking in which we have to understand the sociological contribution to an understanding of conservatism. Number one, he says, is a recognition that society is never in any way, shape, or form a mechanism. It may have mechanistic tendencies. It may even have mechanisms within the society. But society is not a mechanism. It is an organism. It is an organism that has a life to it. It has a birth, it has a middle age, and it has a death. And therefore, as an organism, things must come together organically. They cannot be forced and they cannot be moved by mere mechanism, but rather we must see these things as entities living and growing in and of themselves, and we must recognize that there is a delicate nature to all of this. He says it is an organic entity with internal laws of development and with infinitely subtle personal and institutional relationships within it. Number two, he says, we can never recognize the individual human being without recognizing the individual human being's place within larger society. That is, a conservative must insist upon the primacy of society to the individual, historically, logically, and ethically. That is, as an individual, I am born into a language, I am born into a landscape, I am born into a family, I am born into a religion, and my very individuality can only be recognized when it becomes personality. That is, when it is seen as shaped by those things around me. Now, I can reject all of those. I can reject the landscape and leave it. I can reject the language and adopt a new language. I can reject my parents. But even in the very act of rejection, I am recognizing how important those things are. So by rejecting them, I recognize their deep importance, even when we do the extreme of rejecting. Number three, Nisbet says, from this, those first 2 points, in the third place, it follows that society cannot be broken down, even for conceptual purposes, into mere individuals. The irreducible unit of society is and must be a manifestation of society, a relationship, something that is deeply social. So I can only understand myself as father, as son, as professor, as friend, all of these roles, but those titles really, really matter. My individualism can only matter when it's personality. Then number four. Fourth is the principle of the interdependence of all social phenomena. So all social interaction must come together. So let's think about this for a moment. For those of us who are conservative, we love the free market. But what matters most is not the market, which is a blessing, but the freedom. If we can have the free association to meet as a business, then we can also have the free association to meet as a family, or as a church, or as a school, or as a community unit of association. In other words, it's the freedom that matters, but all social relationships must be interactive with all others, and we must recognize that interaction as a steady understanding of who and what we are as a people. Number five, then, Nisbet writes, number five is an understanding of the principle of needs, not fictitious natural rights. Now, there are natural rights, but those rights must be understood within the context of society. They are not mere abstraction. Again, we must not take this as there are no natural rights. Most conservatives properly understood, especially people like Russell Kirk and Edmund Burke before him, believe very strongly in natural rights. But these natural rights are not merely limited to the abstract individual, but relate to the abstract individual as person within society as well. Number six, for Nisbet, he says this is the principle of function. That is, every person, every custom, every institution serves some basic need in human life or contributes some indispensable service to the existence of other institutions and customs. Now, in some ways, this is repeating the earlier points. That is, everything is interrelated to everything else in an understanding of conservatism and sociology. But Nisbet takes this a little bit further, and he takes us back to the idea that Aristotle gave us. Nature makes nothing in vain. There is nothing within organic society that does not matter. That doesn't mean it can't be flawed. Everything can be flawed. Everything can be perverted. And things do become easily perverted. But Nisbet tells us in recognizing the indispensability of a thing, we must therefore take it seriously, even in its flaw, and we cannot merely dismiss it. Ideas that may be outdated, we must reform. But we still must recognize that even within the outdated ideas, they come from an institution or a person who matters. And therefore, we must take it seriously. Number seven, the conservative, in reaction to the extreme individualism of the common day, which comes originally from the Enlightenment, must stress that there are small social groups within society. So never think of society as merely this abstract mass, but all of society is the local. That is the best friendship that I have with this person or that person, the relationship with my wife, the relationship with my children. Those immediate institutions are the institutions that make up larger society. And as Edmund Burke understood, if I don't love the particular, I will never love the universal. For it is in the particular, the immediate, that I really understand the local level. It's where I really understand if I love my mother, I will love my country. This is where all relationships take place. And that is critical for Nisbet as well as for people like Burke. Number eight, getting close to the end here. Number eight, that conservatives must be led to recognize that there is a reality of social disorganization as well. Not everything will work perfectly. We can't expect, like in a mechanism or a machine, for society to be functional at all times in a perfect way. Things fall apart. Good ideas become corrupted. Good intentions go wrong. And therefore, we must always be on alert. It's not enough to say, well, it exists in society and therefore it must be good. We must recognize that because all things can become flawed, that we must always be on the lookout for reform and for reformation. Number 9, the conservatives must be led to insist upon the indispensable value of the sacred, of the non-rational, and of the non-utilitarian elements of human existence. Each person is a mystery even unto himself or herself. And therefore we have to recognize that within society as well, there must be a recognition that women and men will behave from time to time irrationally. They will behave religiously. And not everything in society has to have a purpose. There are things we do that matter simply because they are part of the human condition. Sometimes we make decisions because we're rational, but other times we make decisions because we're not behaving rationally. In the passion of the moment, in a procreative moment, we are not thinking or calculating, this will lead to 1.2 children in society. This is not what we do. At that moment, we embrace the passion and we romanticize it. Number 10, for Nisbet, is the principle that there must always be a form of status within society. There are things that are low, there are things that are in the middle, and there are things that are high. And we must recognize that there is hierarchy in society because we're each different. My excellence is not your excellence. And therefore, the thing that I do best is not the thing that you do best. There is no mechanical equality in humanity. Instead, we each have a common fallen nature, but our excellences, by the very act of excellences, are unique person to person. Nisbet stresses that we must recognize this. And finally, he says, number 11, we must therefore recognize that there is the supreme difference between power, which is assumed by those in a powerful position, versus authority. We give authority to the teacher because the teacher has earned it, but the dictator assumes power. Those are radically different things, and Nisbet says we must be willing to understand that in a properly functioning society, there will always be authority. Because I have given authority. I have given authority to the policeman because the policeman behaves ethically. Not because the policeman has power, but because the policeman behaves as a policeman should, as an example of moral order and rectitude. Not because he holds a badge, but because he has earned the badge. The same thing is true with my professors. The same thing is true with my administrators, with my parents. It's true with my neighbors. It's true with my friends. There is authority that is given. Power is assumed. Nisbet says we must always be on the lookout for power because power is everywhere dangerous. But authority, properly understood, is healthy in a society. He says authority, properly understood, never degrades. It always reinforces. That's the key to understanding it. It is force or power that degrades, the kind of force that must ensue when the normal authorities are dissolved. And then he tells us this, and I like this. I like the way that Nisbet puts this. It can scarcely be argued that conservatism exerted any widespread influence on the thought of the 19th century. Right? That wasn't what the 19th century was about. For this was the century of great hope, of faith in what seemed to be the ineluctable processes of history, of faith in the natural individual and in mass government. All the major tendencies of Western civilization, the factory system included, were widely regarded as liberating forces essentially. By them, men would be emancipated from the ancient system of status and from communities within which initiative and freedom were stifled. For most minds in the 19th century, conservatism, with its essentially tragic conception of history, its fear of the free individual and the masses, and its emphasis upon community, hierarchy, and sacred patterns of belief, seemed but one final manifestation of the past from which Western civilization was everywhere being liberated. But that, of course, is not true in the 20th century. With the rise of fascism and communism and the deadly idea of totalitarianism, with the rise of mass propaganda, we had to fight it. And Nisbet says it's not enough to believe either in the lone individual or in the mass of society. It's in the small groups, in family, in church, in community, in association, in business. It's in those groups that we best interact with one another. And interestingly enough, we find our very individualism, our personalism within the community itself. So those are things to think about here in late August of 2020. Don't let you yourself be disheartened completely because of the events of the world. The world's hell right now. There's just no question about that. It is hell. But there is truth and goodness everywhere. There is beauty waiting to be seen and recognized. There is truth, there is goodness, there is wholesomeness in all of us. And what we need to remember is that real change comes from us interacting in community, making moral decisions all the time, doing our best, fighting against our flaws, against our sinful nature, fighting against that, and doing what we can by the grace of God to make the world just a little bit better. Because when we make the world a little bit better, when we conserve the dignity and the humanity of the world, we conserve a little piece of beauty, of truth, and of goodness. God bless everyone. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon in another podcast.